Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. We start off our study session. I hope you are being able to hear me well. Just to check the connection. So, okay. So we start off with the Quranic verse that we usually study at the start of our session. This is actually verse 22 from Surah Ibrahim, the 14th Surah. It says, وَقَالَ الشَّيْطَانُ لَمَّا قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَعَدَكُمْ وَعْدَ الْحَقِّ وَوَعَدْتُكُمْ فَأَخْلَفْتُكُمْ وَمَا كَانَ لِي عَلَيْكُمْ مِنْ سُلْطَانٍ إِلَّا أَنْ دَعَوْتُكُمْ فَاسْتَجَبْتُمْ لِي فَلَا تَلُومُونِي وَلُومُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ مَا أَنَا بِمُصْرِخِكُمْ وَمَا أَنْتُمْ بِمُصْرِخِيَّ إِنِّي كَفَرْتُ بِمَا أَشْرَكْتُمُونِ مِنْ قَبْلُ إِنَّ الظَّالِمِينَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. And when the judgment has been passed in the hereafter, Satan will say to his followers, God indeed made a true promise with you. I too made you a promise, but did not keep it. Yet I had no power over you. I only invited you, and you responded to me. Do not now blame me, but blame yourselves. I cannot help you, nor can you help me. I reject from the beginning you making me God's associate. Indeed, there is a grievous penalty for the wrongdoers. So viewers and dear participants, you can see that this verse actually outlines not only the line of action of Satan, our foremost enemy, but also the fate he will reach and the way he will acquit himself from those who followed him. And this actually is a dialogue which is supposedly going to take place in the hereafter between Satan and those who followed him. And look what Satan is saying here. He's saying that the promise that he made with humankind, or those who followed him, was absolutely false, while the promise which was made by God was absolutely true. And therefore, they should not blame him that if they have been led astray and led to this abominable fate, then they should not think that it is something which was the fault of Satan. It was their own fault because he invited them and they only responded to what he said and followed his ways and his enticements. So the bottom line here and the important point which is being made here is that Satan does not have any force over a person. He cannot forcibly lead a person astray. The only event that can occur is that people themselves are led astray by Satan. People themselves think that the invitation which Satan has provided them is so luring, it's so enticing and attractive that they succumb to it. So we need to realize that it's just a force that attracts us in the wrong direction. It's like a suggestion that he gives us in the wrong direction, and we end up succumbing to it. So we must realize that it's not that he will lead us astray if we don't want to. If we don't want to, he will have no power on us. He will absolutely succumb to our own grit and our own strength of character, as we saw in the case of the Prophet Joseph. We know from the Qur'an that Satan tried to entice him, but he actually defeated Satan. And viewers, our biggest test here is to defeat Satan, because all that he can do is create such an atmosphere, cast such a spell. And as you can see, I've actually titled this verse as Satan's web. So it is this web which he weaves around us and wants us to follow him. And these allurements, of course, occur not only in the physical world, but also in the virtual world, in our own psychic world, and in all sorts of attractions that come along with us, and they of course are something which exceed the limits. So these desires, these wishes of Satan have to be defeated, and we have to make this commitment to ourselves that we will try to conquer our own souls. We will try to conquer our own desires. Of course, as we know that Satan is not the only evil who entices us. There are other sources as well. For example, we know that even our own soul is something which whispers evil and suggestions to us. And So it's not just Satan that we need to blame, or at times people do ask that why did God create Satan, and why did he make us pass through such a difficult exam or test in which he is always on his feet and luring us in various directions. So Satan is one form of being led away, or he's one form of trial, he's one form of the Almighty's test. There are other forms of trials as well, and as we see people around us, we see people in various forms and formats doing the same thing as Satan did in his very first challenge to the Almighty. And it's just like people following the path of Satan and becoming little Satans in themselves, those devils in themselves. So at another place, the Quran has actually clearly specified the line of attack of Satan. And the line of attack is Allazi yuwaswisu fi sudurin nas, that Satan is only able to whisper evil suggestions in our hearts. And then he has been termed as Khannas, which actually means that he is one who actually draws away after giving these suggestions. It's like a person who lures you and then he suddenly disappears. And it is as if he would like to appear and then disappear, and make people realize that he is the one who is actually leading them to greater attractions in life, which of course to our own understanding are some things which exceed limits. So the line of attack of Satan, we should all know, because Satan is our greatest enemy. And just to remind ourselves that in Hajj, when we pelt stones at the Jamarat, we are actually symbolizing our struggle, our efforts against Satan, that he is the one who is leading us astray. He is our greatest enemy. He actually is a person who actually challenged God, and he said, "Bima aghwaytani." Look the audaciousness of Satan, the audacity of Satan. He's saying, his words to God are that, "Lord, you have led me astray. Bima aghwaytani." Because of the fact that you have led me astray, I will lead people astray. So this is the audacity of Satan. This is the challenge he threw to the Almighty, and said that if he is given this respite till the day of judgment, he will lead the progeny of God astray who follow him, and he will come from left and right and from top and bottom and present all sorts of lurings and enticements, and people will be led astray. And then graciously God even granted him this respite, and he knows that he is going to doom, and he wants as many people as he can to lead astray and doom them as well with himself. So the line of attack of Satan is not that he has any force on us. It's just that we succumb to his wishes, his desires, his lurings, and we have to be on guard vis-a-vis this fact. And in order to understand this, we need to always seek the help of the Almighty as well, because at times the lurings of Satan are such that we human beings, we are weak and meek, and we tend to give in. So the biggest shield against Satan is that strong God connection that we often talk about, that we must have. And the way that we have this God connection is to have a deep relationship with our Creator through prayers, through reading the Qur'an, understanding the message of God, and trying to bring other people to this religion of God, to this revealed religion of God, which is the same from Adam to Muhammad. There has been no difference in the basic precepts of this religion. All the prophets of God, they brought the same religion, and it has been Satan all along who has tried to lure people, who has tried to lure prophets of God, who has tried to lure all sorts of creations, so that he is able to win more followers for himself. And remember, as in Surah Nas we are told that Minal jinnati wan nas, that Satan is both from among humankind and from among the jinn kind. So it's not just that Satan is something which is a concept of God, or just a force which lures people away. People, they become followers of that great Satan, the Iblis, actually, who was the progenitor of all the devils, of all these evil beings. He was the progenitor of all other devils and fiends. But those who have tend to followed him, whether they are among the jinn or among mankind, they too are classified as devils and Satans in their own right. And as the Quran has specified, they exist in men and in jinn. So both these denominations and creations of the Almighty have people who have these satanic attributes and qualities. We have to be very, very aware of them. So now we move on to the next part of our study circle, and this is the hadith that we are going to study. The hadith is being displayed before you. This is taken from the Al-Jami as-Sahih of Imam Muslim. It says, An Anas ibn Malik qala qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam huffatil jannah bil makari wa huffatil nar bil shahwat. Anas ibn Malik said that God's messenger stated, paradise is encircled with hardships and hell is encircled with desires. So it's like presenting this challenge before us that the Prophet has actually rightfully pointed us out, that the way to paradise is not easy. It's surrounded by a lot of hardships. It's encircled by a lot of hardships. And the way to hell actually is quite easy because it is surrounded with desires. It is surrounded with our own wishes, which we can easily fulfill. They are at hand. And so the challenge that humankind, or the challenge which human beings are faced, is to conquer these hardships and these evil desires and not succumb to these base desires, which of course are called shahwat. And if they do so, then it will be in the form of an eternal loss, because if they end up in hellfire, then there couldn't have been a more evil fate for them. So it is actually the fact that the Prophet is trying to inspire us and trying to motivate us, that don't think that that paradise is something that is going to be achieved very easily. It's the path which leads to paradise is not easy. It's difficult to tread. It has all sorts of deviations which flank it. It has so many thorns which actually obstruct our way, and we tend to get entangled with them. So it's like bracing ourselves at the start of our journey. It is like telling people around us, especially our next generation, our younger generation, that we have to end up on the side of God. We have to make ourselves very strong and have this strong yearning that we have to please God, and we have to end in a fate which is pleasing to our Almighty. And of course, that is the fate in which we should end up in paradise. And of course, this is something which we all need to understand, that a person who ends up there or on the other side is all because of his or her own efforts and his or her own deeds. It's not that anyone is going to help us in our deeds in any way in securing a fate in the hereafter. This is not going to happen. We ourselves will be responsible for the fate that we reach. If we reach a good fate, it was because of our good deeds outnumbering the evil ones. And if it is the reverse, then it will be because our evil deeds outnumber our good deeds. So therefore, we have to rely on our own selves. Of course, the good that we do, which is also a means of benefit for people when we pass away, that will be a source of reward for all of us. But in the absence of that, whatever we have done in our own lives, whatever good or bad deeds which we have done in our own lives, will be of benefit or loss to us. And similarly, any evil thing that we have done which multiplies after us or which takes root after us even more firmly, that will be, of course, added to our account. And as an evil deed that we had initiated and it has gone on amongst other people, the punishment which it will entail will not just be the one that we were the initiators of such an evil deed, but the ones as also who were people who actually gave currency and introduced something evil amongst people. And once we have passed away, that thing has continued to flourish amongst people and of course made our account more heavy with sins. And with this account, we of course need to realize our fate as well. So in a few words, we have to realize that the real contest that we are facing is this contest of overpowering our desires, is creating that self-control, is looking at the fact that the real test lies in self-discipline, in conquering our own personal desires. And actually, it's not, when we say conquer, it does not mean that you have to stifle them or you have to negate them. No, you have to redirect them in a positive direction. So, for example, if anger is something which overtakes us or gets the better of us, And if it comes because of the fact that we don't expect something to happen, of course, this is something that needs to be checked. But what about the anger which arises in us when we see people suffering or injustice being meted out to people? So it's not that anger in itself is something that needs to be condemned. It's the wrong initiation or the wrong expression of anger at times which is something which is condemnable. So we have to realize that controlling ourselves, delaying our reactions, contemplating our thoughts, reflecting on what we should do is something which really gives us this self-control. I would just mention this fact that one of the biggest things that helps you in this self-control is to delay your reaction as far as one can. Whenever something untoward happens, whenever something happens which is out of control, out of our own control, we must not react immediately. It is just those 10, 15, 20 seconds in which our adrenaline pumps a lot and we have this strong urge either to say something or hit out with something or do something very bad. It's just a question of controlling those 20 or 30 seconds. And once that surge dies down, we have control of our own selves. We are more sane. We can respond in a more logical, in a more prudent fashion. So it's just one thing, control and delay that reaction. And another thing which might help in this regard is that if you have to overcome, if you have to make yourself self-disciplined, and you would like to delay your reaction, then one thing which helps us psychologically is this power of auto-suggestion or self-suggestion. Suggest to yourselves in normal situations, when you're not angry, when you're not in a reaction, that whenever I'm angry or whenever I have a reaction, I'm not going to respond immediately. So if you start suggesting this to your own selves when you are in a normal situation, there is a high chance that when that situation arises, you will be reminded psychologically that you had made this commitment. And you will have that flash before you, or you will be given a chance as if you stop at that moment, you will really be able to control yourself. So this auto-suggestion, this self-suggestion is a great technique which, when used in normal circumstances, really helps us in overcoming our reactions. So viewers, now we go on to the third part of our study circle, and this is the Bible verse of the day that we're going to study. In fact, these are a handful of verses, about 11 of them. They are taken from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, and these are verses 10 to 20. And here's what we can read about them, and as you can see, Jesus responding to some of the objections raised by people around him. So they start off with these words, "And he got the people together and said to them, 'Give ear and lend my words, and let my words be clear to you. Not that which goes into the mouth makes a person clean, a man clean, but that which comes out of the mouth.' Then the disciples came and said to him, 'Did you see the Pharisees were troubled when these words came to their ears?' But he said in answer, 'Every plant which my Father in heaven has not put in the earth will be taken up by the roots.'" So, as I've been explaining, that the word Father, when it's mentioned in ancient scriptures the way it is here, it always refers to God, because of the fact that figuratively God is like Father to all of us. So it has been mentioned thus. It should not mislead us to believe that the word Father actually refers to a physical or a biological father, or a father in the actual sense. It's like saying that God is our Lord. He takes care of us, and He fathers us as if He is a person who has intense affection for us. So the verses go on, he says, and it is said that, "Let them be, they are blind guides. And if a blind man is guiding a blind, the two will go falling into a hole together." Then Peter said to him, "Make the story clear to us." Peter, of course, we know, was a disciple of Jesus. And he said, "Are you like them, still without wisdom? Do you not see that whichever goes into the mouth goes on into the stomach and is sent out as waste? But the things which come out of the mouth come from the heart. The things which come out from the mouth come from the heart, and they make a man unclean. For out of the heart come evil talk, evil thoughts, the taking of life, broken faith between the married, unclean desires of the flesh, taking of property, false witnesses, bitter words. These are the things which make a man unclean. But to take food with unwashed hands does not ourselves entrenched with and enriched with. You see, the Prophet Jesus, the point that he is making and the context is that when he started to eat, he did not supposedly wash his hands, so that he had a certain lesson to teach his followers. And the Pharisees, because they were given to such objections as were very, very, very basic, and they would actually be very, very vigorous in those suggestions and in upholding those suggestions and upholding those mannerisms, and in return they would actually forego a lot of things which were much greater in import. So the parable here which Jesus has said, and I think it's very clear, must be very clear to all of you, that the way he has said it, that it's not that the things that we eat or which go into our mouth, they are our means of cleanliness, because of course what we eat is going to in our stomach and it's going to be washed away. But the things which really make a person unclean is what comes from the heart, and that is, as you can see, the things that he has outlined. From the heart come evil thoughts. So what makes a person clean is not what goes into his mouth because he has not washed his hands, but the things which are actually unclean are the ones which come out of one's heart, and they are evil thoughts, the taking of life, broken faith between the married, unclean desires of the flesh, taking property, false witnesses, bitter words. So it's like reversing the situation, and that real uncleanliness is all about expressing evil thoughts. It's all about something which comes out of your mouth and not what goes into the mouth. And of course this does not mean by any means that one should not wash one's hands while eating food, because the point that is being made here is not of this sort. Jesus is trying to stress the fact that cleanliness, because it is being disregarded, its essence is being disregarded, a greater cleanliness is being disregarded, then people must realize that this cleanliness actually relates to the cleanliness of the hearts. The cleanliness of your hands, this is of course required, but it is minor in the grand scheme of things. It is much more trivial in the grand scheme of things. If you are true at heart, if you are true in your desires, if you are sincere in your wishes, this is much more important. And remember the atmosphere in which Jesus was actually speaking. He was speaking in the world of Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scholars who we all know had actually forgotten the spirit of things. They were more into the itsy-bitsy and the tiny things, in which they would go into the mechanics and logistics of things without realizing their spirit. So Jesus here is trying to direct our attention towards the essence of things, towards reality, the certain reality of things which people of those times had forgotten. And I dare say today is no different. Today also we have a stress. We stress things which have little weight, and we leave things which have a lot of weight. Cleanliness of the heart is much more important than cleanliness of your hands. Of course, this does not mean that we should not clean our hands. It's just that we have to understand that everything carries its own weight, its own importance in religion. And for those of you who have been reading the Bible, for those of you who have been through these lessons that we have been talking about every week, you can see how effectively and how potently Jesus has given us these sermons and these short, pithy answers, in which he would actually like us to look at the soul of something, concentrate more on the inner part of something, and disregard for the moment what is at the outer side, because this is something that is eluding us these days, and this is something which was actually eluding people of the times of Jesus as well. So with these words, we come to the fourth section of our study circle, and the discussion topic of the day is leaping out for others. Viewers, as you can clearly see, that this is something that should actually come to us very naturally. The Almighty has endowed us with so many favors. He has given us with so many blessings that they are uncountable. And we know that the Qur'an at one place has actually mentioned this and said, "In ta'uddu ni'matallahi la tuhsuha," that if you start counting the favors of God, you will not be able to do so. So when we are blessed with favors, the biggest right or biggest obligation that we owe to these favors is to pay back and share these favors in the society that we live in. And even the most influential of societies, even the most prosperous of societies, don't think that everyone is prosperous. Even a place like the United States of America, even places which are extremely prosperous on the face of their commodities and their standard of living, you can see that this is something which is still there, and there are so many people who still live below the poverty line. There are approximately 30% at least, 30 to 40% of the people of the world who live below the poverty line. So when we leap out for others, remember that we are citizens of the globe. We are not just citizens of a country. Our first relationship with people is humanity. We are bound with each other in the ties of humanity. As our fraternity is amongst us, is around us, we should not confine our feelings of sympathy, our feelings of compassion to those people who live around us merely. Of course, they are the first, they should be the first to deserve our sympathy and compassion. But wherever in this world, if there is commotion, if there are people dying, if there are children dying in Mexico, if there is a tsunami in Philippines, if there is something which has really happened badly in the remote areas of Africa, this should be it should have the same effect on us. But it will only have the same effect on us when we realize that we are part of a global family. So if we become more myopic and concentrate on the family or the few friends that we have or the country that we have, this will always narrow our vision. And this is not what God wants. God wants to broaden our vision. He wants to make us look at the whole world and feel ourselves as a citizen of the whole world, as a member of this global fraternity in which we feel for people the way we might be feeling for our own brothers and our own sisters. So it's like extending our vision and making it global. If this world has become a global village, our vision should become a global vision as well, in which we have the same sympathy and the same compassion for people. And remember, leaping out for others is not just through money. That is the easiest thing to do, because you pick your pocket, you just research your pockets, you just fish out some money, and you are just able to distribute it to people who are needy. Much more difficult is giving time, is spending time with people who need your help, is talking about them, is talking to them, lending them an ear, giving them that shoulder in which they can really put their heads and talk their hearts out. So it's not just through money that we are able to help people. It's through a lot of other things, and of all those things, I would say expressing one's concern, giving time, giving effort, using our skills for other people is much more worthy of us. So viewers, with these words, I come to an end to these 4 segments of our study session. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them, and I can unmute your mic. If anyone has a question, you are required to please raise your hands. Okay, I can see Mr. Rafia Khwaja. Okay, I'm going to unmute your mic. Okay, please go ahead. You'll have to speak a little loudly.
Okay, I have 2 questions, and I'll start with the first question. In Surah At-Tahrim, which I read, and maybe I...
So we are not being able to hear you. Something has happened with your voice, something with your mic. We are not being able to hear you. You have to unmute your mic. Okay. In the meantime, I'll unmute the mic of Ms. Farah Naz. Ms. Rafia Khwaja, you might need to look in some of the technicalities. In the meantime, okay, it's over to you, Farah Naz.
Assalamualaikum, sir.
Walaikum assalam. In the meantime, I'll. So, is it Mushtaq Saab or? Okay, can we take it one by one? So please go ahead, Farah Naz. You have to unmute your mic. It's self-muted. Kindly unmute your mics, because unless you unmute them, kindly unmute your mic.
Sir, Assalamualaikum, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. So you said if something really aggravated us, we should not show immediate reaction. But can we take care of that incident afterwards or maybe after a few days?
Of course. So, you see. Yes, this is precisely what I have said. You see, if you delay your reaction, and you will be in a better position to take care of the issue at hand. But if you show immediate reaction, then this more often than not exceeds the limit. It crosses the limits. And so if you delay your reactions, you take control of yourselves, you will be in a better position to understand the depth of the matter, and then your response will be much more calculated, it will be much more sane, and I dare say it will be much more effective as well. So I think that your mic is still having some problems. So okay, I'll now go on to Ms. Rafia Khwaja. Ms. Rafia Khwaja, your mic is now unmuted. You can go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Dr. Shehzad, in Surah Tahrim 67, ayat number 4, which I've read, it says, Hazrat Hafsa and Hazrat Aisha are reprimanded and asked to seek forgiveness, and if they conspire against the Prophet, then Allah and Gabriel and angels will protect him, and if the Prophet decides to divorce them, Allah will give them better wives.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm a little confused. How do I understand this?
Well, for more details, I think I will advise you to look up the exegesis of Amin Hassan Islahi. This is available online and you can just download it. But very briefly, if you want to realize this, the translation generally is not correct, which generally causes the problem. So the verse actually is in tatuba ilallahi faqad sagat kulubukuma, which means that if your hearts have been inclined, as you know, the Quranic verses have this background that the Prophet confided in one of his wives, and that wife actually did not maintain that secret, and she actually confided in another of the Prophet's wives, which were of course, they were friends to each other. And whatever the issue was, or whatever the content of that conversation was, we have no knowledge. It's just the fact that the Prophet made one of his wives a confidant, and she actually did not prove equal to the trust that she had been entrusted with. So it is on this that the Almighty is rebuking them and is telling them, if the Prophet of God has entrusted something to you, it's not befitting that you divulge it before you actually talk to him. This is the background. But but later on, when these wives, one of the wives realized that this has happened and this is something which is against their own stature, because being the wives of the Prophet, they hold a certain importance, a lot of importance, in fact, and therefore, if they say something, if they do something, it will be set as an example before other Muslim women. So the Almighty actually said that this is something which is not befitting for them. And then comes this verse which says, "In tatuba ilallahi faqad sagat qulubukuma," which means that if your hearts are inclined towards this forgiveness, towards this the proclivity towards realizing that you have done something wrong, then you are already people who have shown this repentance. فَقَدْ سَغَتْ قُلُوبُكُمَا. Your hearts are only bent towards it. It's not because generally the translations which you will read, they will say that your hearts have been inclined towards evil, or your hearts have been led away. This is not what actually is the meaning of these verses. As I said, there is some Arabic involved in this, but if you want to study the subtleties of this, you can study the exegesis of Amin Hassan Islahi. Other than that, as I said, this is a small lesson in Arabic that we need to understand, that the word sagha, the way it has been used here, is not used in the negative sense. It is used in the form of a positive proclivity towards realization that they had done something wrong, and now they are realizing that.
So this was between Hazrat Hafsa and
So the
Aisha.
Quran has never named these who the wives were. These are some traditions, some ahadiths which tell us that it was between two wives, whether it was between Aisha or Hafsa. We cannot say for certain, but certain traditions do tell us that it was between these two wives. But you see, the point that is being made here is regardless of the names of who the wives are. The point which is being made here is that being the wives of the Prophet is a status which has tremendous importance. And if they have to be confidants of the Prophet, it's like something which they have to honor and trust and bear witness to. And if even a small blemish occurs in this regard, then they have to be set right. So the Surah Tahrim in itself, if you study it in detail, you'll find out that its theme is that as wives of the prophets of God, even they can, if they falter, then they will be chastised or taken to task or even reminded by the Almighty. And later on, if you proceed in this surah, you'll find out that the same standards have been, or similar standards have been set up for common Muslims as well. And they are also told that if they are inclined towards their family, or they have certain proclivities or inclinations, then they have to be in a certain limit. So the whole surah actually is reminding Muslims of their responsibilities, the wives of the Prophet according to their status, and common Muslims according to their status.
Okay, thank you. So it was wrongly, I think, translated. My second question is, Dr. Shehzad, a beloved young relative of mine died suddenly in Lahore of undiagnosed illness, and he was going abroad in a day. And what I want to know is that would he have survived if he had got the best treatment abroad? I take it like a person who wears a seat belt in a crash survives, but one who doesn't, he doesn't survive. So I am very, very upset, and I'm just thinking that what if they had taken him earlier? Could God have changed his life? Would he have lived?
You see, there are a lot of things in this grand scheme of the Almighty that we cannot fully comprehend. And one of these is that the way things happen often makes us think that had this not happened in this way, maybe the life would have been saved. Maybe if that person was not crossing the road at that very moment, he would have delayed. If he had delayed by even a couple of seconds, the car would have just switched through and the person would have been saved. And the same can be said about so many happenings. So you see, what at best we can gather is that there are circumstances which are beyond our control, and then there are circumstances which are in our control. So what we need to do is make the best out of those circumstances which are in our control. For example, if that person was not able to reach the United States at the right time in which he could have been properly attended to, this is something which could not have been helped, because of various reasons, because of the fact that there was a certain ticket to be bought, there was a certain time in which he had to fly, etc., etc. There has to be an appointment, but his death overtook him. So you see, the matter of death lies with God. It is His decision. So thinking that if something had not happened or something should have happened and that would have saved us, that's something which is against the scheme of the Almighty. And at one place, the Almighty has said in the Qur'an that if you had hidden in the greatest of castles and death was destined to come to you, it would have come. وَلَوْ كُنْتُمْ فِي بُرُوجٍ مُشَيَّدَةٍ are the words of the Qur'an. If you were in certain strong castles and would have really fortified yourselves and death was destined to come, it would have still have come. So it goes both ways. Death could have come even if we had done a lot, even if we had safeguarded and made all sorts of commitments, because the matter of death is something which is not under our control or discretion or wisdom. It is under God's wisdom and discretion and control. So therefore, it goes both ways, and it is on such occasions that we need to trust the Almighty and think that this is how it was destined to be. And of course, this does not mean that we should not do anything. It does not mean that we should do anything. It does mean that we have to do what best we could have done.
So now that means God had determined his time of death, and even if he had reached America, he would have still died.
Absolutely. If the time of death had been determined and measured and set about, then nothing could have stopped that. You see, death and birth and some other things in life are governed by the scheme of the Almighty. They are governed by how the Almighty actually sets himself regarding certain things. We just have no say in them. For example, we have no say who our parents would be, who the country in which we are born would be. All these things are beyond our control. So we have to concentrate on things. The lesson to be learnt is concentrate on those things which lie in our control, and forget about those things which are beyond us. We should not be slack in our own responsibilities as far as we can. We should do the best that we can, which is in our control. But things which are beyond our control lie in the domain of God. And in those cases and in those matters, we need to trust Him.
Sorry, Dr. Shehzad, just one more point is that in sin, a lot of babies were dying because they were not getting proper treatment. And so many died, but when they got proper treatment, they survived. So that is what is bothering me. Would he have survived with the best treatment?
So you see, what I'm saying is that had he got the best treatment, he might have survived. But the question is, it was destined for him not to get that treatment. But as I said, it was our responsibility as far as we could to give him the best treatment. We tried, and he could not make it. So the lesson to be learned is that whatever is in our own authority, whatever is in our own control, that has to be done to the best of our ability, and we should not be slack in that. Okay. So I think there are no more questions as far as I can see, and inshallah, hope to see you on next Saturday on the same time. And until then, it is Khuda Hafiz.